Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to Jonathan Tropper, who is the writer, creator, and showrunner for Your Friends and Neighbors. And one of the first things I wanted to ask you about, Jonathan, is the way that you've developed this central character, Andy, which is John Hamm's character, because we meet him at the beginning of the show in the present, but you've also built in this context of, who was he and what were his dreams and ideas and aspirations in the world? What did his marriage look like for 18 years and raising a family? So that we kind of understand him in the present and the reason that he makes certain choices that he does the rest of the series. And I was interested in kind of how you developed that and how it really informed the structure of the storytelling.
I always believed that we would start the story in medias res because we're finding him when the show opens in a really kind of unbelievable and preposterous position. And, I just love starting a story that way and then going back to understand how we got here. And so it was just, when I conceived of the show, I broke it in chronological order, but when it came time to write it, I just felt we don't want to meet Coop at the beginning. We want to meet Coop kind of in trouble, with life already have kind of gone wrong, and then come to understand it. So I think it's a more compelling and suspenseful way to start the show.
When you were building out that segment at the beginning where we see a little bit of how things have gone wrong for him,
Yeah.
did you play around with how much you wanted to reveal and give the audience in terms of what this might be?
Yeah, it was very complicated. And also, when we catch back up to that moment a few episodes later, it's a different director. So I had to get both directors together to make sure the continuity matched and so that, everyone had the same intention with the storytelling so that what we were revealing in episode 1 didn't spoil things for episode 4 and 5. And, just getting everyone in sync with the same storytelling. It's always tricky telling a story out of order because sometimes you have to shoot it out of order.
Absolutely. And I love that you worked with Craig Gillespie as the director in episode 1. How did the two of you work together to really take the visual language that you had already integrated into the script and then figure out how to take it off the page?
Well, the challenge was I had put a certain tone and a certain visual language on the page, but I personally did not know how to execute that. And, there were some of Craig's movies like I, Tonya, and a number of movies, not just that one, where it's really clear that he knows how to thread the needle visually between comedy and drama and farce and satire. And so he was really number one on my wish list for the show. And I was thrilled when he came on board, and when he did, it was just sort of about giving him the scripts and letting him find it. I didn't really have a lot to contribute with how he directed it except to watch and learn and be really grateful that he set such a great tone for the rest of the directors.
I love what you just mentioned about the tone, though, with kind of farce and satire, and then there's also drama elements to it. How did you kind of land upon what you wanted that to look and feel like in this story?
I wanted the show to have a poppy and entertaining feel, and at the same time, I wanted to go really deep with the emotions and the existential crises people are facing, because this is a show about really heavy subjects. It's about, life, death, marriage, divorce, love, sex, middle age, parenting. I mean, there's a lot going on in this show, and I wanted the freedom to explore all of it, and at the same time, there's a little bit of satire, and there's a comedic edge to this, and so part of that was writing it that way, and then part of it was finding Craig to shoot it that way, and part of it was finding actors who know how to toe that line, which is why, Ham was so crucial, Amanda Peet, Olivia Munn. These are actors who are equally comfortable in comedy or drama and know how to fuse them together, which is something innate. I don't think it's something that you can teach or direct. It's something that people can do.
And even with the way that you kind of start out the series, it's focusing obviously on John Hamm's character, and then we get to know a little bit more about Amanda Peet and Olivia Munn's characters. But you really go through kind of all of the supporting characters around them and give us little more insights and windows, whether it's meeting their kids or meeting their parents or just seeing a little bit more of their day to day. And so how did you kind of work to really gradually broaden the scope of the story and the characters?
That's what we do in the writer's room before we ever start. I'm a big believer that there can never be any disposable characters and that every significant character could be the star of their own television show. So the minute you're using a character just exclusively to service your main character, I think you're losing an opportunity and you're missing out on some storytelling. So the idea is we treated each character like the star of their own show, figured out what their arc is, what they're going through, and there's something parallel to what all these people are going through at this particular age, in this particular neighborhood. And it was about mining the thematic stuff in all of them so that it's a much richer tapestry.
And with John and Amanda's characters, Andy and Mel, they were married for 18 years, they're divorced, and it ended with adultery on her part. And yet you also kind of capture that element of the feelings don't just immediately go away and dissipate. They turn into something else, and it just becomes more complicated and more complex in terms of the layers. And so I wanted to ask about the way in which you really wanted to shape that and what felt important to you and the two of them together.
I think I wanted to sort of, if there is a heart to this show, I think it's the relationship between these two people who, because of the world they chose and because of the things they prioritized, they lost each other along the way. And I think the heartbreak and the tragedy for viewers watching it, and the tragedy for these two characters is there are moments where they kind of could find each other again, but it's never the same moment for each of them. And you see both of them kind of adrift in this world, and it's pretty clear that the person most equipped to understand each one of them is the other, and yet they simply can't find each other in this mess.
Yeah, because I think even in episode one, there's a moment where she knows exactly what he's thinking or how he's feeling just from a look. And how did you and the rest of the writing team really look at, based on their history, how do we feel like there are those little integral connected threads and the ways that they're going to know and understand each other in a way that nobody else around them does?
Yeah, I mean, we just wanted, in a way, and I think Amanda has a line like this somewhere in the middle of the series, you don't really stop being married just because you stop being married. And the rhythms are there, and the way to push each other, knowing how to push each other's buttons, knowing what the other person's motivations are. If you get divorced and you live in separate areas, then gradually all that, I think, fades away. But when you're co-parenting and you're living in the same neighborhood and you have the same friends and you're in the same social circles, it's really hard to let those ties die because they're there every day. And I think it's its own unique form of torture to sort of have to face each other post-divorce. It would be much cleaner to go your separate ways.
I also feel like that line that you just brought up that Amanda says in the series kind of really holds to the fact that you allow these characters to be self-reflective and
Mm-hmm.
to kind of, acknowledge mistakes that they've made along the way and kind of find a space of, yes, there is more of a central blame in the ending, but it was both, there were things on both sides that contributed
Right.
to it in the end. And how did you want to make that a central part of what it looks like between them and to allow them to be self-reflective?
Well, I think the fun of this show is that it's about a group of very smart people. And I think there's something equally exasperating about people who have a high level of emotional awareness for the past, but can't bring that to bear on their present. So as much as they can be wise about the way their marriage ended or, something that happened last year or a few years ago, they can't seem to apply that wisdom to what's happening right now, which is why they keep getting themselves in deeper and deeper trouble.
And John's character, Andy, and Olivia Munn's character, Samantha, they're kind of in some sort of on again, off again relationship that they haven't necessarily told other people
Yeah.
about. And it feels like both of them bring the baggage of their prior marriages in very different ways. And so, how did you want each of them to bring their past into the present with each other, but to have it kind of cause different ramifications for each of them emotionally?
Well, what we wanted with that relationship essentially was to say this is not an epic love story. This is really a relationship of convenience. These are pretty much the two only single people in the neighborhood, and they both happen to be really good looking, but it's complicated by the fact that she's close friends with his ex-wife, and also, even though neither of them are necessarily in love with the other, you can't be that intimate for that long without feelings getting in the way. And so, it gradually becomes a push-pull of we're serving a purpose for each other and we're bringing comfort to each other, but we're also starting to hurt each other. And at what point is that not worth the relationship? And, I think all the characters in the show are dealing with similar both existential and relationship crises where, they seem unable to break cycles and change their behaviors.
There's also so much in terms of the fact that everyone around them, because it's this close, tight-knit community, has a voice in people's relationships, even when they're no longer together and kind of discussing their divorce and their feelings, even in front of them asking
Yeah.
questions. And how do you feel like that ecosystem kind of really allowed you to add a lot to those dynamics and to what those relationships look like?
Well, I think in any neighborhood, in any close community, there's a fishbowl effect, right? And everyone is in everybody's business, and it makes everything you're going through so much more fraught because you're not just experiencing it, you're also witnessing it through all the other people witnessing it. And so you're trying to process things and you're trying to deal with things while you're also dealing with the scrutiny. And I think that informs a lot of what's happening in this show. Coop's lost his job, and that's a huge crisis for him. But there's also the fear of other people finding out he's lost his job, finding out he's not the big shot he used to be, and that fear motivates a lot of bad behavior too. And you know, in a nutshell, that's kind of what the whole show is about: is not just self-preservation, but how we behave because of the scrutiny.
And there's something kind of funny about watching him get fired by his boss while sitting in a hot tub with him,
Yeah.
even though he's going through an existential crisis in that moment of realizing the impact of it. How did you land upon the decision of that particular setting for the news to be
You
delivered?
know, I just thought that was hysterical, and I just thought it would be really to have a boss like Jack who is doesn't stand on ceremony and has no shame. You know, to sit there naked in a hot tub with him, that it just seems to be a friendly outing, and he's there to actually fire you. It struck me as absurd in a way that would actually help, you know, launch the show. In that, you know, this is a show where we are going to embrace absurdity to a large extent.
And as John's character Andy starts committing these crimes and these burglaries in the neighborhood, there's that added aspect of he knows these people, he knows the people whose homes he's entering, and so he also gets these windows and facets of their life that they have no idea that he's discovered within them some of the time. How did you scope out, you know, how do we feel like the order's going to go? Whose home do we feel like he's going to go into, and how do we feel like that's going to serve the narrative journey of his character?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was that every time he goes into someone's house, simply to rob them, he's going to learn something he didn't necessarily need or want to know. And the important thing was to let these little secrets that he's accumulating pay off by the end of the season. So there's a lot of fun as you move through the season of Coop learning seemingly random facts about his neighbors, but by the end of the season, he's able to use all of those facts to pay off in some form or another.
And the details of them all are different. He's not looking for the same thing each time, you know, and there's that little snapshot every time he goes into someone's home where we learn, you know, who were they, how did they earn their wealth, what sort of things did they use their money towards, and what was important to them, and why was that an important facet to add to those burglaries, just to give it a little bit more kind of layer for the audience.
We just wanted to tap into the consumerism of this culture and this particular neighborhood. And, you know, his whole plan is predicated on the fact that everyone in this neighborhood has spent years accumulating wealth and accumulating objects and luxury items, and that has sort of replaced, you know, I think, the striving for maybe more meaningful spiritual things. But the notion is every time he takes a particular object and we sort of zoom in on that object and give a little commercial for that object, we're basically just making a comment about, you know, the marketing of Americans' consumerism and the fact that we're all really victims of it, whether we think we are or not.
And there's also this element that the more that he does it, the more kind of comfortable and at home he starts to feel, because there's this life in him that he starts to kind of reconnect to. And how did you want to have each of these moments, each of these burglaries be something that makes him feel connected to himself again, but also to increase the sense of when is something going to go wrong, because inevitably it will.
I mean, there's two aspects to it. The first is that he's doing this out of what he thinks is necessity, but what's really happening is breaking the rules is liberating him. This is a guy who has followed the rules his whole life. He's done everything right, and yet it still somehow in the end was taken away from him. So now he's not following the rules anymore. And we figured the best way to dramatize that is he's also not following the law anymore. He's breaking the rules, the unwritten rules of this society, and he's also breaking the law. And while that should be scary and just a really temporary stopgap measure, he discovers that there's something liberating about it. There's something really liberating about walking around your friend's home when no one's home and you're not supposed to be there. And he's kind of realizing that he has spent 50 years following rules and that it's time for him to start making his own rules. And I think that's the joyous part of this. It's the liberation of it. I don't really remember the second part, but I forgot what we were saying. But
I mean, there's going off the back of what you just said, where to him it feels necessary, you know, because he's built this life and he wants to maintain it, and it feels
right.
important, not just for him, but for his family. But you also bring in the conversation of someone saying to him who isn't in the same social class as him, you think you've lost everything, but you've always had more than some people can ever dream of, and you just want to maintain this lifestyle. And why was it important to you to also explore the different socioeconomic structures within telling a story like this?
Well, that's the thing he has to learn. He thinks he's fighting for survival, but he's not fighting for survival. He's fighting to maintain a particular lifestyle. That's very different. And he can rationalize it to himself that he's feeding his family, but he's keeping them in a 10,000 square foot house. That's not the same as feeding your family. And he has been warped by, 50 years of consumerism and capitalism and, something that he thought he had mastered. And even now that it's all gone wrong for him, I think his brain is still playing catch up and he still believes this is what he needs to save. And so him coming into contact with a housekeeper, with people whose needs are much more primal and much more urgent it's the start of a wake-up call for him that, he might have to, adjust his thinking.
And I think you also capture that element of the more that the lifestyle starts to cost, the more incremental costs suddenly appear, and the more of a strain it can become. And you kind of really use some of the supporting characters to also explore that idea of, what is reality versus what is the illusion, and the necessary presentation of certain wealth as well. And why was it important to you to also really explore that side of the conversation?
Well, the thing that always fascinated me is you drive through these neighborhoods, you see these beautiful homes, rock solid, on lawns, and these people have cars, and your assumption is they have the wealth to back it up. And the assumption is these people have it made. And the toxicity of these environments is that people need to convey it even if it's not comfortable for them. So people are leveraged, sometimes leveraged in a really unhealthy manner. And it looks great, but the problem with being leveraged is it only takes one bad turn of the stock market or one mistake or one expense you weren't expecting, and that house of cards starts to collapse. And so, I think underpinning this show is the notion, and it was driven home to me by the pandemic, that, the scaffolding that we think holds our lives up so securely is actually incredibly fragile. And I think we're all starting to learn with the pandemic, with environmental issues, with financial issues, with the stock market, we're all starting to learn that there's an element of this that's way beyond our control and that things are not as permanent as they seem.
And lastly, I also wanted to ask just about building, Andy's relationship with his sister, played by Lena Hall, because she's so great in the series. And I feel like, again, going back to what you talked about at the beginning of building these supporting characters around him, there's so much kind of emotional weight and baggage and history with a character like hers. And yet you've kind of explored it in this really interesting way that feels very authentic at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, we needed to give Coop one aspect of his life that was really uncorrupted. And this is a guy who has, a sister who has struggled with mental disorders, and he has always been there for her. And it's a very pure love, and it's not the complicated love of him and his ex-wife, and it's not the sort of presumed love of him and his siblings. It's a guy who has taken care of his sister long after he didn't need to take care of his sister. And it's an added financial pressure on him as well because he was paying her rent and he was taking care of her life. But it's the notion that regardless of how lost this guy seems to have gotten, there was one anchor, where he always stayed true, and that was to his sister.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Well, congratulations on this series. I really enjoyed all of the
Thank you
episodes.
so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thanks for your interest.